Hi, this is A New Nigeria with Wale Oluwade. This is your current affairs program where we critically examine the strategic issues bedeviling Nigeria's developmental aspirations and boldly offer practical suggestions on building the Nigeria of our collective desires. Today's episode is a continuation of the series I began 4 weeks ago, where I identified 3 strategic issues that I believe if we can get right, Nigeria will have begun the journey to true nation building and development. The first that I dealt with, strategic issue, was poverty eradication and jobs creation. It was in 2 parts. You can see that on my YouTube channel. Today, we're examining our crude oil and gas management. How can we better manage our crude oil and gas resources to develop this country and its human resources? So we'll take this short break, and when I return, we'll get right into the conversation. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now, let's get right into the presentation for today. The title of my presentation is Nigerian Crude Oil and Gas Resources Management, a strategic template for operational efficiency, transparency, sound governance, and prosperity for the next 10 years. A brief introduction. Nigeria became a major crude oil nation after crude oil was first discovered in commercial quantities as Oloibiri, Bayelsa State in 1958. Since this discovery, exploration and exportation activities began as the country entered into joint venture agreements with global oil giants, the Dutch company, SPDC, that's Shell Petroleum Development Company, at the rate of 5,100 barrels per day. This quantity doubled the following year, and crude oil production steadily rose to its peak in 1979 at 2.4 million barrels per day. Later on, the sole concession rights granted to the SPDC was reviewed, and additional companies allowed to participate in the exploration and exportation of the commodity. This includes Mobil Oil, Gulf, Texaco, Ajip, and others. In 1971, Nigeria became a member of the OPEC, that's the cartel of crude oil producing countries. So Nigeria joined OPEC, and this significantly improved our revenues from crude oil sales. 4 refineries were built in Nigeria with an installed capacity of about 445 barrels per day, 445,000 barrels per day, which was intended to guarantee domestic consumption and export requirements. Now, before the exploration and exportation of crude oil, Nigeria's economy survived and flourished on agriculture. Records indisputably show that 72% of the total national output of our economy came from agriculture in 1950, as against 1.1% from mining and crude oil. The dominant role of agriculture in the nation's fortunes continued in 1960, that's when we gained independence, when agriculture contributed 66% compared with 1.2% from minerals to our GDP. Also, at independence in 1960, more than 70% of exports came from agriculture, while 95% of our nation's food needs were produced locally. Soon, and as the economy became awash with petrodollars in the 70s and all of that, agriculture as the economic's mainstay was relegated to the background, and critical sectors of the economy, manufacturing, industries, and all of that, suffered neglect also. Overall, most of the humongous revenues accruing from crude oil sales cannot be accounted for. Rather than crude oil wealth leading to massive infrastructural and human development, the reverse is the case. That is the tragic reality of our crude oil sector, how we have managed it so far. There is what is called the Dutch disease, which was a theory or hypothesis propounded by Richard Otts in 1993 that says crude oil resource-rich nations usually waste their resources because of poor management, because easy money goes easily. Now, that theory, like you will see later on in this presentation, is not entirely correct, even though it is absolutely correct in the case of Venezuela and in the case of Nigeria, in the case of maybe 1 or 2 other African countries, maybe Angola, maybe Gabon, or thereabouts. But in other economies, like you would see here in Europe, in the Middle East, crude oil resources, has been a huge benefit to those nations' economies, unlike in Nigeria. But the tragedy of Nigeria's crude oil sector management is that not only have we mismanaged these resources that nature or God gave to us, I mean, some of our compatriots are not patient enough now to even wait for the money to get into the system before they steal the money. They are going directly to the source of these monies to break pipelines and all of that. So recently, there were shocking discoveries made by the private security firm Tantiata, which got a 48 billion naira contract to secure Nigeria's crude oil pipelines. And what has been discovered since this company was recruited by the federal government has been mind-bogglingly shocking. Shocking revelations have emerged of what has gone on, the sheer banditry, the act of economic sabotage perpetrated by Nigerians in cahoots with their foreign collaborators. I mean, massive pipelines that are built, connected to trunk lines, for transfocados and all of that, So they are stealing this crude. They are bringing big ships, into our waters. In the full glare, you would expect the Navy to know, you would expect NIMASA to know, you would expect the Port Authority to know, because the movement of every ship globally is tracked. So how come these ships are able to come into Nigerian waters, cut away our crude, take them, and sell? And the nation is bleeding. As you would see, the nation is bleeding. Look at some of these. Look at this picture. These are some of the contraptions, the illegal connections that were done to siphon, to steal, Nigeria's crude. Now, expert assessments claim Nigeria has lost between 500,000 to 750,000 barrels per day in our crude oil, progressively for about a decade. A rough estimate puts this in the region of about $65 million per day. Thus, Nigeria has lost in the last 10 years about $40 billion and 29 billion of this in the last 7 years alone. If these sums are added to the over 10 trillion naira frittered away in the past 8 years, under the dubious guise of petroleum subsidy, the current grinding levels of mass poverty and excruciating misery of most Nigerians become understandable. These are resources intended to provide education, healthcare, jobs, housing, MSMEs incubation, infrastructure, especially infrastructure. We don't have power, we don't have roads, we don't have rails. So all of these are not being done, but the monies have been criminally appropriated by a tiny clique of unpatriotic Nigerians with their foreign collaborators for themselves. What are the implications of the mismanagement and the crude oil theft? Because it's not just crude oil theft that is responsible for where we are as a nation in our crude oil resources management. It is the sheer mismanagement, as you will see shortly. The industry, the sector has been badly mismanaged. Now, to compound to that is the banditry, the grand heist going on in that sector. What are the implications? Number one, the weakening of the value of the naira due to loss of forex earnings. Today, the Nigerian naira exchanges at between 785 to 930 to the US dollars, depending on where you go to buy US dollars. The exchange rate today is about 750 or 930. And because crude oil accounts for over 90% of our foreign earnings, we have governed ourselves in such a bad way. Like we said, once petrodollars started coming to Nigeria, we abandoned agriculture, we abandoned manufacturing, we abandoned industries, we abandoned everything pretty much, and concentrated on using easy money, easy oil money. We concentrated on using this, to further our individual enterprises. So the second implication, loss of revenues to meet urgent national needs. Like I said, infrastructure, power, and roads, and whatever. Inability of the three different tiers of government to meet their financial obligations as and when due. I mean, the new minister for the FCT is talking about variation in contract prices and all these contracts littering, projects littering Abuja, abandoned. In Nigeria, in the entire Nigeria, Nigeria is a ghost yard. It's a graveyard of abandoned projects with well over 50,000, projects abandoned. Jakuta Steel, Itakwe, and all of that, because lack of money to pay contractors. Inability of federal governments and the state and local government to provide essential services to the people, education, healthcare, housing, jobs, business incubation, etc., etc. Inability of federal governments and the other tiers of government to provide critical infrastructure, power, rail, roads, worsening state of unemployment, poverty, misery of majority of Nigerians. I mean, currently Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world, taken over from India and China. So we have well over 150 million Nigerians living in multidimensional poverty. Yet we have earned well over $2 trillion US, in crude oil revenues since 1958. but we're still poor. We're poor. Now, another implication is the worsening state of insecurity and criminalities ravaging the nation's landscape. Now, this act of brigandage also encourages others to engage in large-scale acts of economic sabotage, because if those who have mismanaged our crude oil wealth and those who are attacking pipelines, bringing ships and taking this away, not one person has been prosecuted successfully. I don't even know those who have been arrested and are going through trials, least of all being convicted. Now, so if people do that and get away with it, of course you're encouraging others to do crimes. So that's what's been going on. And finally, these acts of brigandage, these acts of economic sabotage constitutes a clear threat to our national sovereignty, security, and viability. This slide is interesting because it shows you what other crude oil, natural resource-rich nations have done. But not just only those who are rich in natural resources, even those who are not rich in natural resources. This is what they've done with their crude oil revenues. Take Norway, for instance. I want you to pay attention, to the quantum of investment they have under management, and this is called the sovereign wealth funds of the different countries. There's a sovereign wealth fund that smart, wise nations have developed, which is basically a savings account for the rainy day. So countries put up a savings account, and they tag this sovereign wealth fund. Almost every country, well, not almost all, but half of all the serious countries in the world have that. Even Nigeria has got, a sovereign wealth fund. Now, look at Norway. It's a crude oil-rich nation like Nigeria, a population of just about 5.4 million people. Now, they have funds under management, $1.4 trillion US, and it was incepted in 1990, and it is purely from crude oil. So this fund, this huge sum that gives them the rank of number one in the world, was set up in 1990, and it is purely from crude oil. Now, Singapore is another tiny nation, island nation, of just less than 5 million people. They have also over $1 trillion US in management in their sovereign wealth fund. It was set up in 1981, and it is not from crude oil. That is instructive. A tiny nation of less than 5 million people don't have crude oil, just the sheer ingenuity of the people there. And that's why I harp on human development, knowledge economy, because these people, less than 5 million people, are able to build their economy to become a juggernaut. And they have over $1 trillion US, in their sovereign wealth fund. Saudi Arabia, of course, from crude oil, 837 billion or even more than that, because some of these countries have different funds under different nomenclatures. Now Saudi set up their fund in 1952. They have almost $1 trillion. Kuwait in 1953 from crude oil, they have 804 billion US, under management. The UAE, incidentally, Nigeria just came. Our president I think is actually still in the UAE, seeking for money and all of that, and then to strike deals to ask Nigeria to be let off, to visit Dubai and the Emirates kingdoms. Now these countries, Dubai, the UAE in total, the 7 different kingdoms have less than maybe 10 million population. They have over $1 trillion US, from crude oil under management, which shows us, why they could tell us off, why they could call our bluffs and all of that, because they are a serious country while we are not so. And then, of course, the biggest actually is China. So when you take what Hong Kong has got, and then what China has under 3 different headings, China has got over $2 trillion US in funds under management in their sovereign wealth fund. And that is why China has become an economic juggernaut. That is why I keep, making reference to China as a model of discipline, of governance discipline, governance seriousness. So they focused on building their economy, empowering their people, lifting their people out of poverty, and without oil revenues, just purely non-oil revenues, exporting to the world, exporting goods and services to the world. They were able to build huge reserves of foreign reserves. And that's why one nation, China, could gather 52 African countries and be giving them 1 billion here, 2 billion there, because they are a serious-minded people as against what we do here in the name of governance. I'll come back to this, presently. Norway should serve as a role model to Nigeria. What lessons can we learn from Norway. Now, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund is christened government pensions fund. It has 1.47 trillion in total assets as of June. It holds 1.4% of all the world's listed companies in 2019, making it among the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. Now, in December 2021, the total value of the SWF was worth, if it was to be divided, every Norwegian would get $250,000 US dollars per citizen. So Norway, with their funds of 1.4 trillion US dollars, they have invested, they own almost 1.4% of the entire stock market in the world. That's how powerful that country of just less than 5.4 million has become, because money makes you powerful. That's the lesson Nigeria has not learned. Money, when you have money, you're a powerful, person or a nation. Now, secondly, if what they have now is going to be divided amongst their 5.4 million population, each Norwegian citizen will get $250,000 US dollars. Imagine if, out of the 220 million Nigerians approximately, imagine if our country is rich enough to give each of us 10,000 US dollars. 10,000 US dollars in today's exchange rate is just about, depending on what figure you're using, maybe about 10 million naira, between 8 and 10 million naira. If you were to ask Nigerians, would our government give you 10,000? I'm sure most of us would jump at it, but we can't do that currently. Now, what lessons can we learn from Norway? The overall objective of the SWF in Norway is intended to be managed so that Norway's petroleum wealth benefits future generations as well. So this country decided this wealth that Mother Nature has given to us is just not meant for the current generation alone, but we have to keep in mind future generations. We shouldn't behave or conduct ourselves with the mindset of squandering everything so that successive generations come and they have nothing. Nigerian children that are being born now, what have they gotten to look up to as Nigerians? Pain, death, insecurity, banditry, poverty. So that was the decision the Norwegian leadership took. In Norway, petroleum revenues are phased into the economy gradually in accordance with the fiscal rule that over time, government spending must not use any of its funds capital, only its expected investment returns, which is currently estimated at about 3%. The fiscal rule also provides for petroleum revenue spending to be increased in periods of economic downturns and decreased in economic upturns. What does that mean? Two things. Number one, the leadership of Norway decided two golden rules of how they manage their crude oil revenues. Number one, they don't share the money. So when they get their crude oil sales, they get the money, they put it in their sovereign wealth fund. That's one. They don't share the money like we do in Nigeria every month. So they put that money in investments, and then they only spend the interest, which is currently at 3%. That is what they spend. Secondly, and this is very important, now, whenever there is a downturn in the global economy that affects them, they go to that investment and bring it out to ease whatever shocks or gaps that exist in their spendings. That is what they do. And that's why they are able to build this fund to become 1.47 trillion US dollars. Now, also, and this is the reason why in Norway ranks as one of the highest countries in the world on the Human Development Index, because education from primary to secondary to university is free in Norway. Living standards is one of the highest in the world. Criminality and insecurity is one of the lowest in the world. Infrastructure and all of that is one of the best in the world because of purposeful, deliberate, visionary, and patriotic leadership who took a wise decision, how to manage their God-given resources. Now, however, here on the other hand in Nigeria, our political and elite class have been feeding, to use an illustration my grandmother used to say, bless her soul, that we have been eating with our 10 fingers. Every money we have gotten, we have squandered. And there is nothing to show for it, as you would see. So the consequence of that mindset, that attitude to governance, is the mass pauperization of the citizenry and the absence of basic critical infrastructure, social amenities that are taken for granted in other medium to large economies, and the improvements in the living conditions of their citizens. So we have squandered all these resources, about 2 trillion US dollars. We have no infrastructure, we have no electricity, we have no roads, we have nothing. And the people are poorer. Their existence is a living hell. That is what we have succeeded in doing. Next slide. Now, like I said, Nigeria did set up the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So we call it the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. It was established in 2011 by an act of the National Assembly under President Goodluck Jonathan. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala was the Minister of Finance, so she did know about the SWF that other nations of the world, have. So she insisted that that was put in place, and President Jonathan drove that process through its completion at the National Assembly. Now, in 2013, a seed capital of $1 billion was given to it, and a further $600 million under President Buhari was invested. Now, after that, what happened? In 2019, during the COVID, we took $150 million, out of that, to ameliorate the pains and the shock in the economy, occasioned by COVID. So, as of today, what we have in our own sovereign wealth fund is just about or less than $2 billion. Of the almost $2 trillion we have earned since 1958, what we have as funds under management is just about $2 billion. That's a miserable amount of money, considering what we have earned in the decades since we started. Now, the shareholding of our sovereign wealth fund is as indicated in this diagram. 52.68%, is owned, by the federal government, 26.72% by the states, and then the local governments have 20.6%. And this investment is geared to, under three different headings. It is geared to address three different investment heads. Number one, infrastructure. So we're meant to provide infrastructure. Number two, future generation. So pattern just pretty much like the Norwegian model. So we also, on paper, say we want to provide for the future generation. And number three, stabilization, which is what I said, when there are shocks or gaps in the economy occasioned by whatever, we can ease in, money. Now, besides the sad fact that we came extremely late to the party, like I said, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Norway, Singapore, all these other countries, UAE, they set up their sovereign wealth fund 1952, 1953, 1990, 2001, 1987. Nigeria was a member of OPEC since 1971. We knew definitely what these countries were doing. Every year, Nigeria sponsors students to get PhD in different, area disciplines of study. So we know about the sovereign wealth fund, but we just absolutely refuse to do the right thing. We're just making this money and squandering the money. Now, even though imagine if, since we began earning money, of the $2 trillion, imagine if we had saved just a quarter of that. That is $500 billion. If Nigeria had $500 billion in funds under management, I give it to you, Nigeria's currency will not be almost 900 naira to a dollar today. If we had $500 billion under management, Nigeria's currency would almost be 50 naira or 100 naira to a dollar. Number two, if Nigeria had $500 billion in funds under management, major powers of the world will be scrambling over themselves to come to Nigeria, not the other way around. President Tinubu just left India and then is going to UAE. The UAE would not have the nerve to stop Nigerians, to ban Nigerians from coming to their country. They won't do that. Because when you're rich, you have power. Money confers on you power. So in geopolitics, from my years of study, two things give you power and respect in the global arena. Either you have nuclear weapons or you are rich. So if you are rich, like Saudi Arabia, you can practically get away with blue murder, like MBS, that's the Crown Prince of Saudi, did in the case of the Khashoggi case. So Nigeria should sit down, the leaders of Nigeria should sit down, build this economy, rather than strutting all over the place, begging for handouts. God has blessed this country with enormous resources that we have squandered. If we had 500 billion, a quarter of what we've earned since crude oil began to be exported in Nigeria, no Nigerians will be treated so badly in the world. Nigerians will be respected the way the Chinese are respected, the way, Emiratis are respected, the way Singaporeans are respected. Now, imagine also, if since 2013, when we put in that $1 billion under President Jonathan, we decided, okay, at the FAC allocation meeting, we'll divide it into two halves, and one half will be given to the governors and local governments. The other half we put into our sovereign wealth fund. We probably would have about 100 billion, in our sovereign wealth fund. We also didn't do that. Imagine also, if we had all the monies we used to pay petroleum subsidy, Imagine if we had saved those monies in our sovereign wealth fund, we would have at least 10 billion US dollars. But we chose neither of these three options. We just continued in our wastage, in our grand and monumental misgovernance of our God-given endowment. Like I said earlier, in the case of the Norwegian, they are planning for future. So the money is not spent, but we spend the money. So every Nigerian child that is born is being born into misery, a life of perpetual misery and suffering, except, there's an intervention. Now, that's the end of the program today. I believe in a new Nigeria, and it is possible. This is the end of the program. Join me on my various social media handles. Drop me a comment, follow me, and you can watch this particular video and the other one that are there, drop me a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.